And I have conversations with purchasing agents all the time that look, this contract, if we go through it, it protects both of us and keeps both of us out of trouble. Regardless of what happens with the contract, both of us stay out of trouble by understanding and agreeing to these terms. Everybody knows where we're at, to your point, guardrails, and you know where you're at, then there's not any question. If there's an issue comes up, we go back to the contract, everybody understands who's responsible for what.
Well, welcome to Denver, Colorado and Boiler 2024, and we are on the HighFire podcast that we do here at WARE, and got a really cool segment today. Probably never done in the industry before, but we have got three rental companies, WARE and then Wabash and the Nationwide Boiler. And why don't we start, Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Michael Filer, I'm the president of Wabash Power. I've been at Wabash for 18 years, and Richie, I've been in the boiler world for 36 years, so my whole professional career.
Steve Taylor, Director of Sales with WARE. Been at WARE for 42 years, so that's about all I've done since I graduated from high school.
Wow.
42.
Yeah,
Jim?
Jim Liskoven. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Nationwide Boiler. I've been with Nationwide for 10 years now, and I've been in the industry for 42 years.
So Wabash Power is headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. Of course, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, and Nationwide's in Fremont, California. And so a little bit different, obviously. You got competitors sitting around a table, and I have learned the business from these three guys. And of course, Larry Day and Jeff Shellcross and Jim Rafferty. I mean, and Steven obviously has taught me just a ton about the rental business. It's incredible. So special for me, obviously, to just have everybody in here, but for our audience, I think something that's really a big topic that needs to be discussed, and it's so important, is just the rental contract. When our customers get that rental contract, it's just like, oh my gosh, and then they get it back to us and they're marking it up, saying this is what we're going to accept, what we don't want to accept. But it's in there for a reason. Michael, why don't you start with why it's so important to have the rental contract?
Well, I think that rental contract actually is a good thing to talk about, that it's good for both parties. Because many of our customers that are doing rentals think their purchase order covers everything. And I think all three of our contracts are very similar, that we reference ASME code. We reference some of the things that are very important that give benefits not only to us as a contract, but to the lessee. It's specific for a boiler that's burning 100 million BTUs. That could be 750 PSI. So what the lessee doesn't realize, that there's a bunch of things in that contract that's actually good for them. So it's a much better situation of getting that boiler with that rental contract than using their purchase order that may be used for air compressor or a forklift. It's just a good thing. So it's a good starting basis. And I think that having these, it's kind of funny to call them boilerplates, but boilerplate contract gives us a start where our rental companies understand what's in it, and we can kind of guide that lessee through the process to make sure that something they're paying a little bit of money for because they might have a problem or a turnaround. And I think that contract really kind of gives us a basis to make that happen pretty quickly, rather than looking at 100 different purchase orders that aren't similar. We can start with a basis that I think makes it good for both parties.
I mean, there's just so much stuff that's in it, but there's nothing you can really rent without a contract. I mean, you go to the rental car place and there's going to be a contract. You can't say, hey, I'm not going to sign that. You're not going to get a rental car. So, Stephen, how about you? Just what's your thoughts?
Yeah, one of the big misconceptions of purchasing agents is that when you accept or they send their TNCs out with their purchase order, that is going to override the rental agreement, and that's not the case. And so we have that conversation on just about every project we do, is that, hey guys, you can send your TNCs in, but the terms of my rental contract have to take precedent over your TNCs. It just has to be that way. And that's a lot of times that's a stickler. You have to go through and mark out, and they want to do a master service agreement. And the master service agreement has to do with installation and warranty on equipment and not doing damage to the job site. We're not even on the job site until our technician gets there to start the boiler up. So there's just a lot of that stuff you have to take out of it. You got to really be careful. The other big thing we run into is we do a lot of re-rent. So we re-rent to a contractor, and he's renting it to his customer. And we got to really be hard on those guys to say, look, protect yourself and take whatever we agree to. Make sure your customer agrees to the exact same thing to the letter, because any phrase or word you let them take out can mean a great deal of liability on your part that you're not covered on. So you just got to be careful.
Jim, you see that same thing, contractors?
We do. You're right, because if they don't copy over some of that language, they create a liability for themselves, a real vulnerability. And certainly the T's and C's are an important part of these contracts, but the contract itself is important as well, because they often understand that they're renting a boiler or a feed system or whatever it might be, but they don't always understand what's not included with these contracts. And by clarifying these terms up front, you give them a much smoother process, because frankly, they call us because they've already got a problem.
Right.
They don't need us creating another problem by not divulging the details of the rental contract.
Sure, yeah. One of the things that always comes up, I know, is consequential damages. I mean, we talk about that all the time, and maybe Steve can start with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of companies that want us to accept consequential damages, and you just flat can't do it. If you take a company that, let's say they're doing $10 million a day in production, and your boiler goes down for whatever reason, blower motor goes out or gas valve goes out, and that's going to happen. It's a mechanical piece of equipment. Something at some point is going to fail. That's just the nature of it. The rental company can't take on the responsibility for their lost production, and they want you to take that on. You flat can't do it. If they're doing $10 million a day and it's down for 30 days, there's your company. You just afford it. Jim can afford it. Michael can afford it. We can't. We're little guys. We can't do that. So you've got to really be careful, and that's what I push on the contractors all the time, because they want to just sign the contract that their customer sends them, and it's got consequential damages in it. So guys, one hiccup and they take your company. You can't take that risk. You've really got to be careful.
And if that's open-ended in terms of its liability, you're betting the company on a particular project, and we can't do that.
Right.
Well, and the thing I think, Richie, a good point, is the three of us, we know how each one of these companies, because we're the largest players in the industry, how we're going to react. And some of the things that aren't really expressed with the purchasing agent is if we do this correctly, it's going to make it easier on them. So I know many times when you work with the purchasing agent, they think we're taking it all our direction. It comes from the experience that we have, that this is our main industry. We know rental boilers better than anybody. We know where the problems are. And if we can lead them through that contract, it's beyond the damages portion, it's beyond just the liability portion. And I agree with you, Jim, that many times by discussing this contract and understanding what we're trying to do, it sets boundaries immediately that makes the project successful. And I think it goes even beyond, and I've said this about the contract. The contract is more about succeeding with the project than anything. Most of the time they're coming from a point where they're needy and they're in trouble, or they've got a turnaround that they have to get completed on a time frame. And by using something that we're familiar with, that we know works, helps them succeed in their project, because that contract is tested, it's been used most of the time for years, and it gives them a boundary that we can help them make that project succeed. And that's what we're all about, right? We're all competitors, but at the end of the day, the boilers we deliver, or the deaerators, or the water softeners, or the pumps, have to work. They're in a situation where we're there delivering a piece of equipment that's got to work from day one. They're not renting equipment because they didn't have a problem, and they need our equipment to be reliable. And the way to do that is work within the boundaries of what that contract is. So it's almost more than a contract. It's kind of a promise of what we're going to do. And that's how we look at it.
And I have conversations with purchasing agents all the time that, look, this contract, if we go through it, it protects both of us and keeps both of us out of trouble. Regardless of what happens with the contract, both of us stay out of trouble by understanding and agreeing to these terms. Everybody knows where we're at, to your point, guardrails, and you know where you're at, then there's not any question. If there's an issue comes up, we go back to the contract, everybody understands who's responsible for what. So you just have to go through all the details.
You're right, because I think we've all seen contracts and T's and C's that are heavily weighted towards one party. And I think the terms and conditions that we all use are really pretty balanced in terms of protecting both parties.
Sure.
Because it is our objective to provide the customer with a good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So the contract obviously covers on site, but this boiler's got to leave the company, and it's got to get to the site, and it's got to get from the end user back to you. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Michael, start with the transportation side on that.
Well, the transportation scenario is, some have trucks, some don't. We all have trailers, right? It's all underneath. We all make sure that those trailers are inspected. The real key to that whole transportation is risk of loss. And I know on our side, we're willing to take risk of loss because we make sure that it's a good carrier that takes the boiler from point A to point B. So the important piece is, if you want us to take risk of loss, we can do that piece. The real key is what happens when it gets there. Understanding the responsibility of what the trucker will do and not do. They're not there to install the boiler, and they may not even be able to put that boiler in the spot you want it. They may need other things with it. So that it is very important, and I've told them, we can beat your freight price. Sure, you want to put a chicken hauler behind it that's got $25,000 worth of liability insurance, and when they crash it over the guardrail, they throw you the keys of the truck, then we're both in trouble. So again, I agree with you that freight piece of it, how it gets from our facility to yours is important. And I think that we all, and I know we do, we all help them with that part of it. And it's something I would bring back to the contract again. One of the things is the responsibility of the company. We all know that there are a lot of people getting in the rental boiler business that don't necessarily follow the things we do. And I think freight and contracts, maintenance, all of those things are really, really important that I think you're talking about.
Yeah, there are certain things in the contract that, probably 8 out of 10, you'll have something we'll negotiate. Insurance, to your point, is one of them. Insurance, that's easy to take care of. Even if the customer says, hey, I don't want to handle the insurance of the unit at all. I don't want to be insuring the unit. We can take that on. We can charge them a fee to cover the unit regardless of what happens to it. The unit's covered. We can take that on. We don't like to, but if the customer's adamant about it, then we'll negotiate that. It's part of the negotiation process of just different things that you can negotiate on. Consequential damages, you don't. If they're demanding that, you walk. You just walk away from the job.
I think over the years, when I look back on it, how many jobs we've lost because of an inability to come to agreement on T's and C's. I think I'm pressed to find one job where we were not able to negotiate a reasonable settlement with the end user.
Yeah, I can remember one where they absolutely demanded consequential damages, and one of our competitors would accept it, and so we walked.
Yeah,
we're not there.
You're right. You just cannot. No. You cannot bet the company on a job.
I have a few more. I don't know maybe if you're lying, but I would say that I have a few more than a couple that we've said no to. And I think one of the big things about our groups is none of these three companies are willing not to say no. And I really believe the ultimate goal is to make steam at that facility, and the transparency of what we do as a process is really a big thing. And I think, Richie, that's something that you're talking about here and why this podcast is doing what we're doing, is that if we continue to have that transparency all the way from contract to what the equipment is, to what we can deliver, when we can deliver it, and what they need to do at the site, that transparency with all three companies, Nationwide, WARE, and Wabash, is really important. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at with all of this, right? It isn't just words on paper. I always say it's really simple to work out the contract. It's about delivering and actually telling the customer what to expect when it gets there. And I think that's kind of what you were implying, Jim, all along.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, and there's ways of getting around, we were talking about consequential damages and just how big of an issue that is for us. But there are ways of getting around that. If a customer really insists upon some level of protection, then we can limit the consequential damages to, or limit the damages to the value of the contract, or something like that, that caps the potential damages and liability. And in most cases, that seems to resonate with end users.
Yeah. Jim, I'm assuming, not assuming, I know that you have different people start your all's boilers. I know we have different people start our boilers that are not necessarily part of our company. How does the contract handle that? Where you're bringing in a contractor to do the startup for the unit. How does that work?
Well, typically our subcontractors are covered within the language, certainly within the indemnification language. We talk about our subcontractors and that is a distinct possibility. I don't think it's ever been a problem.
Yeah.
I think our customers realize that if we make a decision collectively to send a startup person to the job site, that they're qualified.
Yeah.
And we get very little questioning about that.
Stephen, what about when it's not our decision and the customer picks the startup?
Yeah, those are tough ones, and you know, probably 80% of our technical issues on a startup on site is where the customer has chosen someone else to start the boiler up, and they're not familiar with the equipment. They're not familiar with, you know, the feed system, setting up the temperature control valve, the VFDs on the pumps, just all different things we put in there. They're not familiar with it, and 5 days into it, they still don't have steam, and the customer's raising Cain, and they keep calling us, and so we've got a rule of thumb: we don't start a boiler over the phone. If the technician is up to the point where we're having to tell him, hey, you need to toggle this and do this, we time out. Let's do something. We're not going to do that. We can't start it over the phone, and it is an issue. Most of the time, our technical issues are when we have someone else or the customer has someone else, and sometimes we can demand. We just hard line. If it's a superheater unit, we're going to start it. Right. We're not going to let you start it up. We're just not. And that's part of the negotiating process in the contract, and let them understand their expectation is WARE is going to provide, Wabash can provide, Nationwide, they're going to provide a startup tech on this piece of equipment because we don't trust anybody else to do it, to be frank. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, we take a harder line. We don't allow other people to pick startup. So we're very, if we, and we don't do as many fire tube mobile steam plants as WARE for sure, and I think Nationwide also. Most of ours are IWTs, industrial water tube boilers, and we have a big fleet of superheat. We may agree, let's say, with somebody you brought to us from WARE, and we share a lead, and we can supply something. We may agree to have your people do it, but Wabash gets to choose. And it's because we're trying to do three things. And it's really important to make sure that the safeties are checked. And that's the most critical piece of this, right? Combustion is usually all set up already, but what we're gonna do at a startup is we're gonna make sure all the safeties work. And that's critical to make sure a piece of equipment that's burning 100 million BTUs is not gonna cause and we don't use the big E word, we call it an incident, right? And then we also wanna duplicate combustion. And we wanna make sure that boiler is efficient up and down. And then the third piece is we wanna make sure that the operators that are taking ownership of that piece of equipment for the next 90 days, a year, 6 months, whatever it is, feels comfortable operating that boiler. And we know that the person is qualified to make sure that happens. Because there's two pieces, right? I think, Steve, you talked about it, that it's really hard to get a good startup guy that can handle controls and understands the process of making steam. You may have a really good guy that can handle an Allen Bradley system or a 353 Siemens system, and they know how to set up the loop controller, but they have no idea why that water level is jumping around because the feed water valve's not working properly, and they don't understand all of those processes. So I think that the startup guy, defined by what we call a startup guy, is different than what most end users are used to. They're used to tuning the BMS or the combustion controls, but can't get the rest of that stuff. And they may not know how to work on a pump, or they may not know how to work on a water softener. And we really need the startup people. So again, back on Wabash requires that we approve who's doing startup. We're not going to let them know, pick the person.
Well, that makes good sense because we all take a great deal of effort and care in preparing our equipment for these typically emergency situations. The wrong startup guy can turn the best piece of equipment in the world into something that doesn't resolve the customer's problems. So we're not only protecting the customer, we're protecting our own individual brands. So, and again, we don't do things because we just randomly choose to do things. We do things because we've learned lessons over the years on how to provide our customers with the best solution.
The other thing we run into, when you go through the contract process and go through the site process, explain to them what's going to happen. When my tech gets there, he's not going to get there and flip a switch and walk away. The first thing he's going to do, he's going to tell you if you got power turned on, turn the power off, because I'm going to go through and check every connection to make sure they're all tight. This thing just traveled down the road 100 miles, 1,000 miles, whatever it did, things happen in vibration. We're going to check every connection to make sure it's tight. Just things we walk through with the customer to let them know the first 4 hours, you're not going to see a thing because all he's doing is checking things to make sure everything is right. So you're not going to see anything happen. And just setting those expectations is absolutely critical.
Go ahead.
Which I think really speaks to another important part of our job, which is often educating the customer because they may not know what all is involved in preparing a rental boiler. And we need to let them know.
Which is a good segue in what I was going to next, and that is when the boiler gets on site, what is the responsibility of the customer? What should he or she be doing to immediately start protecting themselves with the equipment getting to the site? What should they do? What should the customer do?
Definitely have the right installer, have all the drawing packets, all the information that they need, typically good guidance from our companies to help them establish a winning strategy to connect this boiler. Because again, a boiler that's connected wrong performs poorly.
Yeah. What about like just the cleanliness? I mean, when it gets there, what should a customer do? Right? Do you say, hey, look at the boiler, open it up, take pictures of it,
We recommend that as soon as it gets there, open it up, take pictures of everything, water side and fire side. When the job's over, do it again. And then before it ever comes back to us, hey, we did a good job, or we added scale to this unit. We're going to have a charge coming back to clean this thing back up because it has to be returned in the same condition we received it, part of the contract negotiation. So,
do you all have scale at all in your boilers come back?
That's another whole podcast for you.
Yeah.
But I think, Rich, one of the things you talked about is building this expectation from the lessee, from the lessor. And many times there's the people who are operating the boiler, the purchasing side and the manager side. And I use an analogy the management believes it's a toaster oven and it comes in and you plug it in the wall and automatically this thing just works. But it's important when that boiler gets there what the expectations are. And Steve, you brought up scale. I think the contract and what you do, and let's talk about the steps of what protects us and protects the end user ultimately, right? So we offer in all our contracts, come visit the boiler and inspect it before it leaves. And we encourage, come look at it, right? And in most places, it requires a third-party inspection by the state or by your insurance. So there's a fire side and a water side, an additional inspection again. And most places, water tube boilers and fire, they need to be hydroed. So there's a gasket change on the manway. So many times, I don't know about you guys, but we ship it with a rubber gasket. And you can hydro that boiler with that gasket, but you're forced to open that up and change it again before it's run. It's another step in the process to making sure that water side is clean. That gives them that whole feeling, and it's something that nobody thinks about. And those are built in, and they're going, oh, do I have to do this? What we're really building that piece in there is to really help both parties, because we want a boiler to come back in identical condition, right? None of us send boilers with scale. Boilers don't make scale. It's all about water. And they say, what do I need to do when it gets on site? I tell them there's only 3 things you got to worry about when you rent a boiler. You operate it, you maintain it, and you insure it. Those are the 3. And if you set that expectation up, it all's pretty simple. The boiler comes to you clean, bring it back clean. So all the process in between there, do what you do with a regular boiler and do what you with yours. But as long as that expectation of management, the engineering people and purchasing comes together, and they all understand it works.
And one of the things that we have difficulty with, and we struggle on a lot of jobs, especially with bigger companies, because we've been negotiating with the purchasing guy. That's the only people we've been dealing with is the purchasing guy. They may be in New York and the job's in Texas or job's in Maine, wherever it's at. They have, and so everything we've sent to him, he's kept on his desktop, hasn't sent anything to the job site. So then we have to find a job site contact and make sure this guy has all the drawings, all the information, and you go through all that process again, because if you don't, you're setting yourself and the customer up to fail. I mean, it's just a process you have to go through to make sure everybody understands exactly what they're getting, what the expectations are.
Yeah, very true, because how often have you supplied a rental boiler to somebody and you've asked them, why do you need the rental boiler? And they say, because I've scaled up my boiler.
Yeah.
So obviously, whatever they were doing to protect their boiler is going to need some modification to protect our boiler.
Sure.
And so again, we're back to education, expectations, helping the customer to understand what might have gone wrong with their permanent equipment so that we can help the rental to be more successful.
Michael, you said something about taking care of the boiler, which is something that's so very important, obviously, but there's the boiler, but then you might have an auxiliary piece of equipment that you've provided. And we've heard things like, well, but your water softener had problems. Question, is that on the the customer or the company that's rented the boiler, or is that on the end user?
And again, I take it back to the three things. You have to inspect the equipment and know that we as a group are giving you equipment that works. And that's why we want to do startup. So there's a proof in what we're doing, because our startup people won't leave until everything works perfectly. So we've now set an expectation, and we're not leaving. I don't know how many customers you asked that they want a fixed number for startup. And I said, it doesn't exist, because there's no way for us to imagine what your site's going to be like. So I tell them to keep the startup guy as long as you want him. It's training, it's all of those things. And until you feel comfortable with that, I don't want you to have that guy go. So again, I kind of take it where we're now building an expectation, here's where we are. And until we get that agreement, it becomes very, very difficult. And then it comes down to the three things again I said. You only need to do three things when you rent a boiler: operate, maintain, and insure. And if they ask the question, which is what I'm asking them to do, when I say that, it's you're responsible for everything. And once they get that it's just a piece of metal, water softener really doesn't soften any water. It's the brine that you put in the water softener that works with it. The boiler doesn't produce any scale, it's the water you put in it. And big question is, and we could talk a little bit about it, is logs, right? How do we encourage these lessees to keep daily logs, checking their water softeners, making sure their deaerators work? I think that's kind of what you're asking about. And that maintenance portion of that, operating it, you almost want to ask them, what are you doing with your own boilers?
Exactly.
And if they're not keeping logs there, I don't know about you guys, I would much rather not rent a boiler if I knew it was going to come back scaled. There is no money in the world. I don't care if you're paying double. We don't want a boiler to come back dirty. So there's no reason to do any of that. Agreed, Steve? I don't know.
I agree, and we have customers all the time ask us, so how can I tell if I'm scaling my boiler? Well, you're doing your daily test, you're doing your TDS. The quickest, easiest thing to track every day, all day long, is stock temperature.
Absolutely.
Check your stock temperature. It's in the part of the daily boiler log, and look at it every week and say, okay, my stock temperature was 453, 460, 471, 481. Boys, y'all better be paying attention. You're doing something here that's not right. It shouldn't climb like that, so be paying attention to it.
Because we all have a vested interest to help our customers identify these things, because to your points, if a customer scales up a boiler, we have before and after pictures, it's pretty easy to document the damage that occurred on site, but nobody wins when you negotiate repair bills. It's much better to make sure that the customer has a good plan, understand their responsibilities, their expectations, and avoid these unnecessary damages.
Yeah, and the whole reason they had the boiler there is because something happened with theirs. They needed steam. So if we didn't set the expectations and give them guidelines of what to check, we haven't done our job either, because now they've got a boiler that's failed because they didn't take care of the water treatment, because we didn't educate them properly, or we didn't talk to the right people on the front end. So we both messed the job up, and that's not what we're after.
Right.
We've got to get them steam and keep them steam.
There's a lot more to renting boilers than delivering equipment.
Absolutely.
That's the easy part.
Yeah.
That is the easy part.
Any other things that the customers come back on the contract and said, I don't want to do that? Is there any other things we haven't covered?
What I hear a lot, because sometimes we'll send out our rental contract and our terms. They come back with a PO with another set of terms. And of course, the last set of terms in prevails. So you're negotiating, and they'll say things like, that's never going to happen. Don't worry about that language. This language is designed for situations that we don't expect. And if it's in the contract, if it's in the T's and C's, we're bound by it. So we do have to be very careful with making sure that there's nothing in there that exposes either party to excessive liability.
Anything else that you see the customer
one of the
do?
things we laugh in our contract, and I won't say what percentage it is, but past due bills. We have an interest rate, and I can tell you in my 25 years of doing it, I think the last 24 months, I've had more lessees argue about the interest rate. And I say, if you're willing to pay your bills, you should never even worry about the clause in this contract. Well, they say they pay their bills every time. And I said, well, then just gloss right over this, because you'll never have to pay that bill with interest, because you're going to do it. And I explained to them that the reason that's there is, just for instance, that you're our ERP system, and we're all talking about payment stuff. They're sending that to India and other places, and they don't pay their bill. Well, you're going to get charged interest. And they said, well, that's excessive. And what I'm sharing many times is some of these penalties we have in there are excessive on purpose, because we want people, when they don't do something, to notice it. And if it's not a big hammer, and you say it will never happen, and it sounds hard and harsh, it's really to help both parties. Because the end users, the people who are renting our equipment, they want to pay their bills. That is more for, as you said, Jim, the stuff they say will never happen. Okay, well, if it'll never happen, then don't worry about it, what it is.
Yeah, and there's two reasons to have that interest payment in there. One, it's a deterrent.
Correct.
They don't want to pay that. The other thing is they ask, well, it doesn't cost you to carry that money. No, what it costs me is for my credit manager to call me and take time out of his day and my day, and then we're calling you, so we're spending a bunch of time that we should be doing other things, but now we're having to call you and take time out of our day. That has to be compensated. We have to be compensated for that time somehow. So that's what that's in there for.
That's right. And Michael, to your point, if you pay your bills on time,
Never
it's
happens.
meaningless.
It is exactly meaningless. And it kind of does first circle. Back to the contract stuff and all of this stuff. And it's something we really push hard every day, is what are your expectations for us? And so one of the things that I'm really big on, the purchasing agent gets it, and they think it's a commodity. I'm going to go get a boiler. And they don't have a clue that they'd like an economizer, an SCR, or they need a water softener. So it becomes a commodity item to them. And we all ask solution-driven questions, right? We're asking questions to pull out as much information from that person as we can, which allows us to give them a good solution. And what it all comes down to, forget all the paperwork, and we can work the contracts out. I know the three companies that are here, we're all solution-driven. It isn't renting boilers at that point, and we forget all about the metal. It's all about renting a solution that's going to deliver the right amount of steam for their given project. Because what happens if it's a batch load where they only need it for an hour and then they shut it off? If we don't ask those questions, we give them the wrong boiler and they fail that boiler. So it's kind of funny. I always tell people, you're really not selling the steak, you're selling the sizzle. You're really selling that solution or renting that solution to the lessee. And it's all that process and the pain that we're asking those questions. That purchasing agent wants to get a number. How many times have we all heard, just send me a darn quote. Just send me a quote.
Yeah.
I don't want to send you a quote. I need to ask these questions or we're going to fail. Do you want us to fail? And that's a question. And then I shut up.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing. But what you need to do is say, do you want a solution or do you want a boiler?
Because until we understand their needs, we really cannot tailor a solution to them.
You cannot.
No, and you will get them, to your point, you'll get purchasing agents that say, hey, you're not talking to the facilities manager, you're not talking to the maintenance engineer. All you're going to do is talk to me. I want a proposal. This is what I said I needed. I want the proposal based on that. And there's sometimes that you're forced to say, I'm going to either give them a quote or I'm going to back away from the job.
We don't give them a quote.
Yeah.
I can tell you we don't quote them.
Because the purchasing agent said, this is all I'm going to give you. You're not talking to anybody else in the plant. And so send me a quote or I'm going to go to somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we understand that's setting the project up for failure.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is.
We
for
understand
sure.
it.
And none of us want failures.
That's right.
None of us want failures.
No, not at all. Well, this has been pretty good.
It has been really good.
Enjoyed hanging out and talking with you guys, and we didn't violate the antitrust thing, which is great. We made it through perfect, and we're really not bad guys. Maybe had some contract stuff, but it's truly there for protection of you as the customer, but also protection of ourselves and the businesses that we have and the equipment that we have, the investments that we make. It's very, very important to make sure that the contracts are always gone through, signed contract before it leaves. So very important as well. So really appreciate you guys hanging out with us.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming by. We'll see you next time on the HighFire podcast.